So back here with Brandon.Hersey, you know what I'm saying? We want to switch gears a little bit and kind of dive into, you know, your job. Seattle Public Schools. You're on the school board.
Yes, indeed.
What's the title?
Yeah, so I am the school board director for District VII.
Man, that sounds official.
Yeah.
School board director for District 7.
Yes, indeed.
And I'm sure there's lots of responsibilities, but for timeliness, maybe you can tell us what are some of the official duties of that role?
Absolutely. So like the official duties are, 1, to evaluate, hire, fire the superintendent. 2, to provide oversight on the budget. To serve as a policy arm of the district, right? So every policy, most things, especially fiscal policy that costs above $250,000 needs board approval. And we also oversee the budget. So we have a big meeting every year. We review the budget, and there are also quarterly meetings and things like that to make sure that we're on pace and staying accountable to the document that we all agree to. But then also serving as a community representative, right? Being able to be out in the community, understanding the needs of your community and bringing those back to the dais, as they call it, the boardroom where we make all the decisions and have our legislative meetings, and bringing those things back to the dais to make sure that our communities are accurately represented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how big or what area does District 7 encompass?
The whole Southeast Seattle. So in terms of buildings, we have the most physical school buildings in our district. I think we have like 21 schools in our district out of the 104 that exist in Seattle. So we're talking pretty much everything south of I-90 that isn't West Seattle.
Man, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
So do you also have the most students?
Not necessarily, right? It depends.
Somebody else might have more high schools,
exactly.
And you might just have more elementary schools.
It depends on
right?
population density and all that, but we would have to, dig a little deeper in that to see what is the actual, because what we also see on our side of things, and really one of the big pieces that we're having such a huge problem with enrollment. So that plays into the factor of knowing like where are most of the students, but then also understanding like that our populations are really transient because we have more renters than homeowners.
Right.
So there's a lot of different facets that play into like which specific district has the most students from year to year.
Right, yeah. Right. I could imagine that. Yeah, you have a lot of more people moving in and out of the South End than say like Magnolia or Queen Anne.
Exactly
or something like that.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Right. So now I don't claim to be an expert on Seattle Public Schools.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's been a long time since my kids were in the school district. But yesterday did two interviews here yesterday, and one of them was about the state of education, and the other one was it's a guy in the neighborhood, the deaf chef, who actually has a food lunch program.
Right.
And so I want to ask you about some of these things here. But the first thing is about the actual where is the state of Washington and Seattle Public Schools when it comes to like how good the school system is in terms of results?
Yeah, so one of the things I want to back up just a little bit. So last year, there was circulating around on Facebook. I think the lieutenant governor shared it. It said that we were the number one economy in the United States. Number one economy in Washington State. And that takes into account like how much business is here, what type of business, how fast is it growing, all those pieces. But then when you cross-apply that to the fact that we're actually ranked really close to the bottom, like bottom 5 in terms of how our schools are performing. Wow. And we have the 5th worst opportunity gap in the entire country, right? So
let me stop you right there. What's the opportunity gap?
The opportunity gap is the idea that because of all sorts of different barriers, systemic racism for me being the primary one, but also things like housing inequality, income inequality, the way that schools are run. It's the gap in opportunity between students of color, specifically black students, brown students, and white students, right? So that gap exists in how much opportunity students have access to, and how good of a job are we as policymakers, educators, community members, things like that. How good of a job are we doing in closing that gap, bringing those two groups together in terms of to where everybody has equal opportunity, right? And you'll hear people say that a lot, equal opportunity, blah, blah, blah. But really what we have to look at to undo that is equitable opportunity. And a lot of folks get that kind of mixed up, right? Equality is everybody having the same. Equity is when everybody has what they need. And you take into account things like systemic racism, institutional inequality, those types of things, and you make policy that uplifts those students that need more.
Right. And since we're doing video, I'll make sure that we superimpose this, but I think you might have saw that cartoon or meme where it's three guys, they're trying to look at a baseball game over a fence.
That's exactly it.
And and it gives an example of being equal, where all the little podiums are the same height. But equitable is if there's a short guy, then his should be a little higher so he can also see over the fence as well.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. People need to know the difference between that, right? Because that's really where, because I teach in federal way, but I'm on the Seattle School Board because I obviously live in District 7. That's really where regionally, especially when we're talking about like King County, especially South King County, a lot of school districts are having the conversations around equity. What are we doing not only in classrooms directly working with students, but also with policy to make sure that we are at least trying to narrow that gap as much as we can.
Right. And so now back to the gap now. You said we have the fifth, basically best or worst, I guess fifth worst gap, in America, right?
Yeah. And it's a shame, right? Because you would figure in a place like Washington that has access to all of these major companies, Amazon, Microsoft, T-Mobile, so many different companies that are doing well, that are making a lot of money. And yet we have this crippling opportunity gap where the opportunity just isn't there. You know what I'm saying? It's just not there for our students because of all of the other barriers that keep them from being able to have access to those opportunities. And where it primarily starts, in my opinion, is with the school district, right? So thinking about, it's a multifaceted issue because everything plays into it. We're going to be talking about school lunch here in a minute, nutrition services, but also thinking about how homelessness disproportionately impacts our communities, how transience disproportionately impacts our communities, how when you shuffle around principals and like when you start the year off with misprojected enrollment numbers, how that destabilizes our learning because like I said in the other segment, I'm the son of a teacher. I grew up knowing how impactful the school building, that physical space, was for our communities, right? The school oftentimes is the one-stop shop for the beginning to get access to whatever service you might need, especially for Black and brown communities. And so thinking about how are we not only servicing our students through these buildings, but how are we doing a better job of servicing their families and providing the things that they need in order to be successful so that they can, provide a better life for their students and, as well, right? So we can
right. Well, so the thing is, what the conversation I was hearing was that Washington as a state and Seattle public schools in particular, the way that they're rated nationally as far as the level of achievement of the students they're graduating is, we're not producing competitive students for the industries that are driving the economy in our state.
Absolutely. And that's absolutely right. We have to think about what are we doing on our end to give our students the skill sets necessary to be successful in these places and to compete, right? And it's a complicated situation, right? Because a lot of folks have this conversation about, well, we need to build Black excellence. We need to get our Black and brown students to a certain point. And I want to really be very careful about how we have those conversations because excellence exists inherently within Black students, right? And so what I think a lot about is not necessarily what are we doing within our system to get our students who are furthest away from educational justice. To me, that means Black and brown students. What are we doing not necessarily to get them to these spaces that we determine to be excellence, but what are we doing to reorganize our system to be ready for our students, to celebrate our students, to understand that excellence and capability presents itself in ways that don't traditionally play into this white narrative of what success looks like. And, we have to, be able to look at a historical context that public schools from jump were never created to work in favor of Black and brown communities. So we're having to undo a lot of that, rebuilding a system on top of a fundamentally broken foundation.
Right. I was on air on 11:50 a.m. last week, and come to find out that the very first chapter of the NAACP in Seattle was started in 1913. It was by a Black woman who was a teacher, and she lobbied to get the NAACP here because of the treatment of Black students in Seattle public schools. Wow. This was 106 years ago.
We still having the same conversations. Yeah.
Right. And so now, I mean, another thing, and I know that you have a lot of policy points, and we'll get to that. But another thing, because it was interesting to me, is there's, man, it's the deaf chef. It's our man, you know what I'm saying, Maine, from the Central District. Yeah. And, you know, he really is. He's the deaf chef because, you know, he used to rap. And, you know, now he's all about his food service. Yeah. And he started a lunch program because, you know, I mean, one, the nutritional value in Seattle Public Schools. And so basically, you know what I'm saying, parents can subscribe to his lunch program, and he's delivering, you know, nutritious meals. And what we came to find out is two things from him. Is one, the nutritional value of the meals in Seattle Public Schools, according to him, it's horrible. He's like, things like, you know, tomato or ketchup can be considered a vegetable, and, you know, and all kinds of things. He said that, you know, the bulk buying of food, you know, and he challenged like guys to get a picture of a tray of food from like Walla Walla or Airway Heights, one of the prisons, correctional institutions in our state, and compare it to the trays in Seattle Public Schools. Now, beyond the nutritional value in the food, there's also a food shortage. So there's kids who just are not getting food in school. And I mean, the thing is he kind of pointed out, he was like, well, see, when you make something free, then, you know, you ain't got nobody to complain to because there's nobody who's accountable around that.
And that's backward.
Right. And so maybe you could speak to, as an educator, how important nutrition is in the school district, and also how important, you know, I mean, programs like Jermaine's, like the Deaf Chef, where the community, I mean, he took that from a model from the Panthers from a generation ago of actually feeding our children. Free breakfast program, so you could talk about nutritional value and maybe, you know, how these hybrid programs might work well in the Seattle Public Schools.
Absolutely. So as a teacher, you know, I see the lunches that my kids eat every day, right? Again, if I hadn't mentioned it in this segment, I teach second grade down in Federal Way, Washington. And I eat lunch with them on a regular basis. And there was about a month last year where I was going to commit to eating school lunch with my students. You know what I'm saying? And so when I was, you know, when you get used to eating it, you see this is not really lunch. This is a collection of snacks. You know, it's not really a full nutritious meal. And what we have to also keep in mind, this goes back to that conversation about equity. So many of our kids in this part of town depend on school as their primary source of nutrition, right? They are receiving breakfast and lunch at school. And in a lot of schools, I know that this is true in Federal Way, I know it's also true in Seattle, they send backpacks of food and things like that home with students who might not necessarily have as consistent access to food over the weekend, at night, that type of thing. So nutrition is something that we definitely need to get right. Like, it's unacceptable to hear that we have, you know, students at Rainier Beach and all over the South End and really citywide as well that are not getting the food that they need at school, especially when they depend on those avenues for their nutrition. And so when I think about, especially with the situation that we're in right now, I see kind of like two pathways forward from this, right? So first off, I've been in close contact with the PTSA president over at Rainier Beach. I've been in contact with school leadership. I've got a call with the services director at some phase. And then I personally haven't been briefed by the district on the status of what's going on quite yet. But I do have several emails out sharing community concerns and responses that have been shared with me. I've forwarded those on to district leadership, and I'm awaiting a response. I think what we really first need to do is get a full understanding of how did this happen and how did we get here, because what I was mentioning before, we need to get this right. And before we make any type of like bold creative action, we need to have the full information in front of us. And we need to be able to share that information with our community partners in order to figure out how can we circumvent this and keep this from happening in the future. And I think what you mentioned just a few moments ago about having community partners and programs in place, we need to be making sure that, especially for the schools that have the highest amount of students that get free and reduced lunch, that have the highest amount of students that are furthest away from educational justice, that those schools, before anything else, have access to the food that they need in order to get those kids to be able to function, right? Because I've got kids in my classroom that are experiencing hunger, that are experiencing homelessness. And when you have those types of pressures weighing down on you, and a lot of times these are kids, right? I don't care whether this kid is a kindergartner or a 12th grader. These are children. You need to be fed and you need to have those nutrients in your body in order to perform in class.
Right. You know? Well, I mean, it's almost unbelievable. in the fact that we talk about the great wealth within the city of Seattle, and on top of that, I mean, gentrification means higher taxes. Higher taxes means more revenue. Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? The schools are primarily funded through property taxes and other things. So I mean, it's almost laughable that the nutritional value of the lunch in Seattle Public Schools, I mean, to the point that a lot of the lunch now isn't like, when I went to James A. Garfield High School, home of the Bulldogs.
Shout out.
When I went to Garfield High School, I mean, it was a lot of on-site preparation, as in, exactly. I mean, you'd almost say cooking. But now a lot of the meals it's like it's prepackaged somewhere and heated up and everything else. And we can't have an expectation of our children to perform well. Even if somebody is eating well at home and the nutritional value at home, it's like, why are we giving our children this? Right. You know what I'm saying? And
we would want to eat that on a consistent basis.
Right. And one thing Dev Chef pointed out, he was like, man, see how many of the people who are preparing the lunch at school actually eat the lunch. Right. Or see how many, in a lot of countries, the whole ecosystem around the educational infrastructure, they're all eating the same thing. So you know what I'm saying? Yep. Wherever, even if like the school district, if there's a cafeteria there, they're getting the same food as down, as everywhere else. Absolutely. But a lot of people in the ecosystem here in Seattle Public Schools, they don't eat the same lunch the kids do.
Absolutely. And I think that really what I am thinking about, and I am currently having conversations talking about the feasibility of this, but there are so many other school districts surrounding us, given they're not as big and so they don't have as many financial constraints as we do, that do what are called from scratch programs and green programs at their schools. Now, from the from scratch program, and there are lots of schools that already exist in a pilot. It's put on by OSPI, which is the Office of the State Superintendent for Public Instruction. There are so many different programs where they actually have kitchens in their schools, because there needs to be a kitchen in a school, where they prepare the food and the students work with nutrition staff. And even if the students don't work directly with nutrition staff, they're preparing full course meals in the cafeteria at the school. And like you were just saying, to your point, a lot of what we see in schools nowadays is that these meals are already prepackaged and they're coming in, and a lot of kitchens are actually just warming stations, right? And so there's not a whole lot of cooking that's actually going on inside a lot of our schools. So thinking about long term, how are we engaging with community partners to get more from scratch programs into our schools? But then on top of that, if we're talking about like having distribution issues and whatnot, what are we doing to partner with local farmers markets, with local food providers and things like that are already happening? But how are we expanding those programs to make sure if we do get in a situation like this in the future that we have a plan B, right? We should never be in a position, in my opinion, to where we have students who are losing out on meals, because that goes directly against our strategic plan that aims to serve those students furthest away from educational justice. Because like we talked about before, it's all a multifaceted issue. All of these experiences are interrelated on how students perform in the classroom and what they are able to do. If you do not have a place to lay your head at night, if it's inconsistent, if you do not have a plate of food in front of you, or if it's inconsistent, you are stereotypically put in a position to perform worse than a person that might have those accommodations, that might have those things off top. And what we notice is that a lot of our children, a lot of kids in our community don't have that. And even if they do, it shouldn't even be a question on whether they have it or not. But we need to make sure that we as a school district have plans and policies in place that if something goes awry, we are ready to respond quickly. You know what I'm saying? And that's just we have to get this right. This is unacceptable and non-negotiable. We need to figure out how do we prevent this from happening in the future moving forward.
Right. Now, would you be willing to meet with Dev Chef?
Absolutely.
Understand
no, and that's a big part of my community engagement plan, right? Like, the more I learn about programs like this, what I want to know is what is working, why is it working, and how can we replicate it to make sure that this is in as many places as possible. Now, to be fair, it's got to go through a policy process, right? But there's still a lot of learning that needs to be done. And the first part of that learning to get these types of programs and get them replicated is to sit down and have a conversation, right? And not only with me, we need to be opening this up to the entire board and to the entire community, realizing that this is a problem and here is a brother out here who has a solution to it. How do we make sure that this can be replicated in other spaces as well? right? So I would be 100% open to it. You know, any opportunity, like I said, I'm a teacher, so I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner. Any opportunity I have to learn about a program that's going to make a better experience for our students, I'm 100% there. You just let me know what time and where so that we can make those connections and get this done.
Right, man, that's fantastic. So, tell us about, you know, your vision. Some of the problems that you had. You know, I only named like two kind of major ones. But I mean, you know, some of the issues that are out there, maybe even some of the successes, the good things that are out there that, you know, that we can build upon. And then also what your vision is. And I know you talked about engaging with the community, man. I'm opening up the floor to you.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's a lot of really good work that's going on in the district right now. I think that, you know, I'm really excited to see what Dr. Mia Williams' office will do with the Office of African American Male Achievement. I also know that there is a lot of effort being put in to recruit and retain teachers of color, and figuring out how I can be a support to that work is something that's at top of mind for me. But I also have a lot of work that I need to do on my end in terms of not only developing a clear and consistent community engagement strategy, but then also I think a lot about the curriculum needs for our district as a teacher again, but then also the fiscal needs of our district, right? Making sure that we have policy that reflects the needs of our students and that we actually have the money to back that kind of stuff up. So if we're talking about community engagement, a few ideas that I really want to share are, first, I'm going to be having, for the foreseeable future, 2 to 3 community meetings a month. And I'm going to be thinking about where we're having those community meetings. Is it accessible by light rail or bus? Does it have parking? And is it in a space that is welcoming to people of color, especially Black and brown families? I think that that's incredibly important. And also, is it happening on a Sunday or Saturday? Or is it happening on a weekend to make sure that I'm as accessible as possible? I think that's incredibly important because a lot of ways that folks typically communicate with the school board is through email. And what I've learned throughout the campaign trail when I was seeking the appointment is that doesn't always work for our families. We need in-person communication. We need phone calls. We need to be setting up phone trees and things like that already exist, but doing that on a bigger scale so that we can engage as many people as possible. So having those community meetings and making sure that they're in centers where people have access to and that they're at varying times is going to be really, really important. I've got 2 on the books right now. I'll share out my email and I'll share out my link with where you can be able to meet me. But I'll go ahead and share it out here as well. The first one is going to be on October 20th. I believe that one is from 3:30 to 4:30 at the Beacon Hill Library, which is accessible by light rail. And the next one is on Halloween, October 31st. That's a Thursday. And that's going to be at the Rainier Beach Library. And that's going to be from 6 to 7:30. Bring your kids. We'll have candy, but it's just looking for opportunities for us to come together. And like I said, I'll share out all of the official pieces for that. But also the community meetings thing, I want to really revamp the way that we've done community meetings as school board directors in general. I think what I really want to do is figuring out how can we have joint community meetings between me as a school board director and organizations like Africatown, like the Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, or CSEC, Families of Color Seattle, the Boy Scout troop that I run with Michael Charles, Troop 008, Fathers and Sons Together, all of these people that have very close ties to the community in different aspects. How can we come together and have a coalition building around specific issues that are happening within our schools? And how do we break down that information, right? Because that was one of the things that I noticed when I was going around speaking with all these different community organizations on the campaign trail, is that we're all coming at the same issue from different avenues, right? And I really want to get more to the point, especially when we're talking about educational advocacy, that we are in the same room and on the same page. And the only way that we can do that, and the way that I think about a lot, is by breaking down those barriers and unsiloing the information that we have, right? Because when we pull together resources and when we pull together our learning and our understanding in a way that is authentic and makes people feel valued, there's nothing that we can't do, right? We just have to go the extra step. And really by we, I mean me. I have to go that extra step in finding ways to facilitate that learning and to figure out ways to bring especially parents into the conversation. And I think a big part of that is going to the organizations that already do amazing work within community engagement and bringing the issues to them. Because that really feeds off by my teaching practice. Again, we have this best practice that we're supposed to meet children where they're at, which means that if a child is at this place academically, we don't have the expectation that they are going to meet us where we're at. We have to go down to them and scaffold for them and position them to be successful. We as elected officials need to do the same thing. We need to be able to meet our communities where they're at in order to build these coalitions and continue to strengthen our community, so that when we have to move on certain issues, there's not as much organizing that needs to happen. You know what I'm saying? We already have a shared understanding and a shared vision of what we want for our kids. Now we just need to be in the same rooms and unsilo all of that learning and start to share our resources more.
What skills do you feel that you bring to be able to, I mean, because it's one thing to listen to a room full of grievances and even good ideas, but to be able to take that information and that you unpack or you unsilo and turn it into what, as they say, actionable points and all these kind of things. Is that a skill set that's within you?
Absolutely. So just to provide context for, how I got to this point, I grew up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I'm the son of an educator, and my dad repairs copiers in Hattiesburg. And growing up, I had always spent my time in schools, right? Following my mama around while she was setting up a classroom over the summers, also being with her during work sessions and whatnot. So I've always been around how schools work. Immediately after graduating college, I got a job under the Obama administration in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services working on social safety net policy. So when I say social safety net, I mean like temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, WIC, all that kind of stuff. And so I got a really clear understanding of how these policies work on a national level. But I was really dissatisfied with the work because we had all of these amazing people that were writing policy for our communities who had never worked directly with them before. So I knew that when we moved to Seattle, I wanted to be in the classroom because I wanted to work directly with those communities, right? And so I think the skill set that I bring is not only having an organizational mind, not only for policy, but also for people, but also from my perspective of working directly with families, especially like I think 99% of my class this year are students of color, right? So working directly with those families and encouraging them and engaging them in a way, especially around education issues, is something that I've been doing for the past 4 years. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm excited to bring a lot of that learning here to Seattle and continue to serve as kind of that point person and be able to bring folks into the room to continue to have those conversations and figuring out where are there opportunities for us to partner? Where are there opportunities for us to come together and share our understanding around issues so that we can be a united front when we need to advocate for something? Because what we really see is that we have individuals who do a lot of advocacy and they are closely linked with specific organizations. But when we're thinking about coming out as a Black community, we need to figure out how do we continue to do that work in a way that is effective, because we've already been doing it. And I think that there's a lot more opportunity to expand upon that work. And that's something that I think about as well.
Right. A quick question then. Yeah. So coming into Seattle Public Schools, what incentive, and now with so many charter schools coming out, I mean, people are trying to find any way possible to get their kids out of Seattle Public Schools. Yeah. I mean, why should somebody, if they have an opportunity to go to like one of these charter schools, why should they continue to have faith in Seattle Public Schools? Why should they continue to have faith in somebody like a Brandon.Hersey or something like that? You know, I mean, my mom always says that, you know, you can get the most calm person, but people become radicalized around their children.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? That's where people, you know what I'm saying? So why should somebody give Seattle Public Schools another chance, another year to experiment with their kids?
Right. Well, I don't think we're necessarily experimenting with anybody. I think that's a dangerous road to go down, but I feel what you're saying. I feel the place where it's coming from. And I think what should keep people here is the direction that we're going, right? We have one of the most progressive strategic plans in this country. We have very clearly said throughout many policies that we are putting Black boys especially at the forefront of who we are trying to serve, along with other students of color, along with those who are furthest away from educational justice. Why they should trust in a Brandon.Hersey or anybody else who is doing this work is because we have folks like Dr. Mia Williams, we have folks like Dr. Keisha Scarlett, and so many other principals and educators in the system that look like us that are fighting on the forefront of policy, on the forefront of the opportunity gap every single day, right? And now we finally have this document that has been agreed upon by the entire school board in our district that gives us the opportunity to move in the right direction. Now, that doesn't mean that we should be without accountability. That's where our biggest piece comes in, and how we need to organize our communities so that they can continue to hold not only me accountable, but we definitely need to hold me accountable, but also our district, our principals, our educators, because when we have those accountability pieces, we do better. But we don't do a great job right now of engaging with our community. So we need to figure out how to get that done in a better way as well.
Right. Well, I mean, and I understand, as speaking in like a school board member in a district voice, when you say accountability. But also, man, you know what I'm saying? These parents need to be held accountable. You know what I'm saying? Like, man, I'm gonna just throw it out there. You know, my mom, it was 4 boys. My mom used to catch the 48, you know, and go to PTA meetings. She'd be in the building, man. She'd be on our ass. You know what I'm saying? What's up? What's your homework? What's this and that and everything else? You know what I'm saying? And at the time when I was young, my mama, she didn't have no advanced degree or anything like that, but she knew that it was important. My mama was present, and you know, you see in the results, and now you know, and all of her grandkids, you know, they've gone on, they're all moving into college and all these other kinds of things. Man, there has to be an accountability gap with the parents. And I be seeing a lot of parents, man, you can't be in the club and your kid is failing. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so not to go off on a tangent here, but like it's almost like with policing in a sense, right? So a lot of police officers, they went to academy or whatever, and you know they learn all these things about crime. But in a city like Seattle, the police force is now the mental health worker. They're now dealing with homeless issues. They're the front line of, you know, overdosing and everything else. This is something they never went to, you know what I'm saying, to training for. Our teachers are dealing with so many issues because parents aren't accountable in the home. Now, there's some parents that, you know, through addiction or criminal justice or things like that, they're not present. But a lot of parents or man, they're just on autopilot. You know what I'm saying? And we see the results in the school. So before we throw the whole school board under the bus and saying that you guys are failing our children, man, what do you have to say about parents and how important it is that parents are accountable in their children's life?
Parents are the experts on their kids, man. And I want to give complete space to, and this is the way that I think about it, and it's something that I've learned through my time in the classroom. You know, when there's a golden triangle that we talk about in education. There's student buy-in, teacher buy-in, parent buy-in. And then obviously the principal and the school board have effects. But if you're talking about that direct method of getting a student where you want them to be and goal setting and things like that, if you have that golden triangle, you can get anything done. I also want to be cognizant of the fact that something that I learned through my teaching experience is that a lot of our families have really negative experiences with K through 12 education. And so a lot of folks are sending their kids through public school, but then they don't necessarily feel as comfortable coming to the school and whatnot. Does that excuse not being able to have
they got to get over it. So how does that compare to the generation before that grew up in segregation? You know what I'm saying? 100%. I mean, you from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Yes, what kind of educational experience did your father have and grandfather have?
Absolutely.
You get what I'm saying?
No, you and I are 100%
I'll be honest with you, man. You know, I just be trying to call a spade sometimes. And people that are making excuses. Yes, there's people who have real life limitations, but when it comes to your children, your education, I mean, to me, you got to be present. As present as you can be. If you can't be in the building, you know, most of the teachers are accessible. Parents are accessible. Emails, phone call. How's my child doing this and that? A lot of times, these parents ain't showing up until they get a notice. Your kid's not going to graduate. Your kid might get held back. Your kid might be whatever. I mean, how does a Brandon.Hersey see engaging the parents? I mean, because we want to hold you accountable because you're the director of District VII.
Yes, indeed.
But man, how do you see holding parents accountable for the success of their child?
Just like we talked about the opportunity gap before, creating that opportunity, bruh. I mean, I think one of the coolest things that I heard throughout the entire process was, and your brother brought this up at the first forum, was this idea of a parent academy. How are we creating spaces for parents to come and learn how to advocate, right? Because at the end of the day, I can't force anybody to do anything, but what I can do is provide the opportunity for those families that do want to get engaged. How am I providing the tools necessary for them to be successful in that engagement and to make their voices feel honored? And so that's really where I'm focused focus and my energy on, you know what I'm saying, creating those opportunities for individuals to engage and learn how to do it and to come and do whatever they need to do what's best for their kid. Because I want to genuinely believe, and I do genuinely believe, that everybody wants the best for their kid. They might just not necessarily know how to advocate for them in the way that's effective, or how do they get access to the people that make the decisions.
Or they might think that the system just works, but people don't realize the system only works if you work.
Right, and we all have to be a part of it. We all have to be engaged, right? And so how do we do that? How do we build that? And those are things that are at top of mind for me. Yeah.
So, I mean, speak a little bit more about, you know, your vision and things that you're wanting to achieve.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you in the seat, and it's a hot seat, by the way.
Absolutely. So. We are here, man. I think that there's so much that we could be doing right now. And I break that up into two kind of main focus areas. I think that, like I said, again, thinking about some of these community engagement policies, I really think about, again, like we mentioned before, how are we engaging parents? What are we doing to break down and unsilo information? And I think that's number one. But after we, you know, not necessarily after, because that's going to continue to be a process throughout, you know, my term and hopefully my second one. The other things that I think about really are curriculum, right? We've got this ethnic studies curriculum that's been hotly debated, and it's going to be something that's going to be coming to the board relatively soon. We're amending a policy that will make that adoption process more equitable. Hopefully it passes through. But what I think about is, where's the focus of the ethnic studies curriculum going to be? And then how can I support that work, right? So I have experience developing and writing curriculum from a K-5 standpoint. And what I know, by making curriculum more culturally responsive, what I do is I take a lot of, like, especially our history curriculum and our math curriculum, and I think about, where is there an opportunity for me to insert someone who did this, who was either a black woman or a black man, or something that's representative of my classroom, right? And what I found from my experience teaching second grade is that a lot of the microaggressions and things like that happen within a K-5 learning environment. So when we have conversations like, you know, just relating it to STEM, we're always so quick to put STEM programs in high schools. And by the time we do that, a lot of our kids don't have access to the material because they didn't have that foundation.
Yeah, I mean, STEM works in high school, especially other high schools, because in elementary school, guys were doing Minecraft.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying, when they're in elementary, and then, you know, they're doing hackathons in middle school. So then by the time they're in high school, they thrive in the STEM program.
Exactly.
But you have to engage the youth, you know, early on.
We need to have more K-5 learning opportunities, and we also need to have more early learning opportunities. I'm talking about like preschool, right? Because it's easy to like put together a program, because like when a lot of folks like, you know, Microsoft and Amazon, whoever it might be, develop these programs, they're looking mostly to high school students. But what we really need to be focusing on as a community, if we're really going to be about our strategic plan, if we are going to be about actually doing right by our black and brown boys and other students of color, we've got to figure out, how do we get more of those opportunities in K-5 to build that strong foundation, so that when they get to middle school, when they get to high school, and they have opportunities like hackathons and what have you, they have access to these things in a way to where they can also be successful. Because that's the biggest part of it, right? Equipping them with the tools early to be able to take advantage of them down the line. I also think a lot about, specifically when we're talking about curriculum needs and things like that. Hold on, let me pull that up. Yeah, so I also think a lot about, when you're talking about curriculum is only as good as the person who's delivering it, right? So when I think about the ethnic studies curriculum, I'm really excited because Tracy Castro-Gill is doing a lot of really great work around that. And we also have Jesse Hagopian, who's serving on the state. The state is also thinking about doing some type of ethnic studies curriculum. So they have their own thing going on that's kind of separate from the work that we're doing in Seattle. So I'm keeping my eyes closely on both of those things. But really, what I also think about is the people who are delivering the curriculum, because we need to have more educators of color, more students who look like our students, because when we're delivering this curriculum, it needs to be done in a way that gives the full story, that gives the full perspective. And there also needs to be space for what happens after the lesson. You know what I'm saying? We get so focused on content and what's going on during the lesson and what's on the paper, that when we don't really think about what happens after. Like, how do we unpack this when a kid comes to you and is looking for a way to apply that lesson? Do we have enough cultural competency in our classrooms to support students when they come to their teacher with that? I don't know the answer to that question. I would assume not. And so I'm really thinking about, what type of training is going to be attached to ethnic studies when we adopt it. But I'm also thinking about specifically supporting the district in recruiting and retaining teachers of color. And what we know from the data is that we're not convincing a whole lot of Black folks to move across state lines to come teach in, Seattle public schools, even though we are moving in the right direction with teaching or paying teachers a professional wage. What we also need to realize is that, it's going to be a difficult job to think about, like, how are we recruiting Black and brown teachers from other parts of this country to come here? We're not seeing it. The data doesn't suggest that we're doing a great job of that. But what we do well is that we are actually retaining teachers of color quite well. And what we're seeing is we have a lot of movement in our district, and our teachers are actually, when I say teachers, I mean our teachers of color, are actually moving to schools where there are more students like them. So that is what we're seeing, and that's based off of data that HR has collected. But also, what are we doing to create a pipeline so that students who are interested in becoming teachers, as well as paraeducators and other classified staff, they have a pathway to get a teaching certificate so that they can actually step into the classroom? Because honestly, I think one of our district's greatest strengths is our diversity. We got 53,000 students, and the majority of which are students of color. How are we positioning them, if they so choose to give back in that way? How are we positioning them as a district and as a city to be successful? And the district is doing a fairly good job of that. They are putting almost $1 million, I believe the quote was like 800,000, into these various programs, and continuing to support those programs, I think, is going to be really crucial. But then also being ready with policy to support I-1000 should it pass, right? What does that look like to continue to recruit the kids, or not necessarily the kids, but the folks that look like our kids, to come into the classroom, right? And engaging with folks and letting them know that there are options. If you have a bachelor's degree, you can go to HR today and talk about what a conditional certificate looks like, especially as a Black man. We need more Black male teachers. We need more Black teachers in general. You can walk into HR today and have a conversation about what obtaining a conditional certificate looks like, and be potentially teaching in a classroom, who knows, as early as the next month or maybe even the next year. You know what I'm saying? So those pathways exist, but we have to figure out what are we doing to engage with our community and to find those individuals who are interested in taking advantage of those types of opportunities. We actually just had a really good meeting the other day at the John Stanford Center with the NAACP, where a lot of folks didn't know that those opportunities existed, and they were asking those questions of our Superintendent Juno, and she was really forthright and just came out and said, look, these opportunities exist. We just need to find folks who are willing to fill these spots, right? And so I think a lot about, how can I have an impact on that? What can I do to go out into the community to find brothers and sisters who are interested in serving our kids in that way, and connect them with the resources in order to do that.
Right. Now, a few more questions for you.
Absolutely.
It's just a fact. You're an outsider.
I am.
You know what I'm saying?
I am.
Like you said, you're from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. A great story.
Yeah.
Of coming from a family of educators.
Yeah.
You came out here just about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You live in South Seattle.
Yeah.
You teach in Federal Way.
Yeah.
Now you're dealing with a community.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of dynamics here in our community.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? The Black student has never reached, despite all the programs and this and that, and even the late Superintendent Stanford, who the building is named after, and everything else. There's a lot of people in our community that tell you that the Black student has yet to reach an achievement level in Seattle Public Schools. On top of that, you're dealing with a community that is facing gentrification at a rapid rate. And on top of that, you see the income gap that came out. It's like a Black family, a Black household in Seattle makes $42,000, while a white household tops out. Right, it's exactly. So you've got a lot of dynamics at play, and being an outsider, how are you seeking to really gain the community's trust? And I just want to be clear that you serve all of District 7. However, you are here on Africatown Media, and so we're focusing on the African American and African diaspora communities. But how, as the outsider, which is factual, are you looking to build the trust of your constituents? Because this wasn't an elected position.
Right. And I can appreciate that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that when I think about this idea that, I'm coming in from this perspective of being an outsider, and like, yes, in physicality, I am an outsider, right? Like, I would even say at this phase that I was an outsider, because since I've been here, I've dug deep into my community, right? I haven't engaged as much with Africatown. I'm excited to do that more going forward. But I mean, if you take a look at my scout troop, I directly service and directly work with 15 young black men who go to school on the South End every single day. You know what I'm saying? I spend at least an hour with them a week through community meetings, and at least a weekend with them a month, taking them out, camping, backpacking, hiking, that type of thing. But then again, working directly with a lot of communities in Federal Way that used to live in South Seattle. You know what I'm saying? So the reason that I'm in Federal Way is because there aren't a whole lot of teachers that look like me in Federal Way. For the first 2 years that I was in my building, I was the only African-American teacher there, servicing almost 500 black and brown students, So when we're thinking about how do we build that trust and how do we continue to have that conversation, change only happens as fast as people trust me. And my daddy used to always tell me growing up, I can show you better than I can tell you. And I'm going to continue to show up because that is who I am. I come from, like I said, a long line of educators, but also a long line of black activists down in Mississippi. I know what trust looks like and what it takes to build that trust. And do I have an expectation that people are going to trust me off top? No. But what I can do is continue to show up, right? And to be honest with you, bruh, my work is going to speak for itself, really. I'm going to continue to come in and engage the community as best I can. Anybody who's excited to engage with me, I'm excited to engage with you. Anybody who might not necessarily be excited to engage with me, I'm gonna still find ways for us to get into the same room and have a conversation, because everybody's perspective is important. Even though I occupy this seat, I don't look at this opportunity as a means for my own personal and professional growth. This is an opportunity for us to do right by our kids who need it the most. And in order for me to have the bandwidth, and in order for me to have the lens in which I need to get that done, the community and being out in the community and building that trust, that's step number one, right? So that's why this was the first interview that I accepted. That was why when I got the text message, I was hyped. I literally stepped outside of my classroom to respond to it real quick so I can make sure that this was a priority, because these are the types of conversations that we need to have in order to build that trust, in order to get those types of things done. And that's at the top of mind for me. That is a high priority for me. So my request would be, continue to engage with me, man. Send me emails, call me. I will make my cell phone available, right? Because the more that I know and the more that I engage with our community, the better of a board director I'm going to be. You know what I'm saying? And I just need that engagement. And I'm willing to come to you. I'm willing to make it as easy as possible for us to get there. Meet me halfway, you know what I'm saying? That's kind of the idea that I have around it, is the only way that you build trust is to show up and to do what you say you're going to do. And like I said before, I can show you better than I can tell you.
Right. Yeah. I can tell by your answer that this is something that people have approached you about.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, I think that, of course, something like school board is a very local type of position, but the challenges that especially our school district faces, I mean, these aren't new challenges.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They're called every decade. They're called something different. Every few years, they're packaged a bit different.
Right.
And, I mean, it sounds to me like you're coming you're coming with a full understanding of the bigger picture challenges. Now, some things are on a micro level. How is this particular neighborhood impacting X, Y, and Z?
Absolutely.
But I think to be an effective school board member, you have to be able to look at the micro level and also to the macro level, and to be able to build policy.
Right.
And speak a little bit more, or to the point. About coalition building. Now, you just said now that you're willing to engage with people, but engaging with people and building a coalition,
right.
Which is probably going to be required in this city to move things along. So, I mean, talk about coalition building and what that looks like to you.
Absolutely. So, like you said, there's the macro level and then there's a micro level, and understanding all of these issues from a multifaceted point is incredibly important. Throughout the campaign throughout the appointment process, I received the endorsement of Bob Hasagawa, Senator Joe Nguyen, King County Labor Council, Seattle Education Association, along with Elijah and Deion Foster, and so many other, PTSA presidents, various folks within the community. And because the way that I look at these issues is that if we're actually going to get anything done, it's not just going to happen from the school board. It's going to have to take a coordination with city council members. It's going to have to take a coordination with the legislature. It's going to have to take a coordination with the community. Being able to come in with that multifaceted approach and understanding that we have to all be on the same page to a degree as much as we can be is incredibly important, right? So I think the first step is having a clear understanding of the issues from the macro level so that when I come down to the micro level, I can help facilitate a conversation about what needs to happen and how this directly impacts individual communities, right? Individual neighborhoods. And that's going to take time, and that's something that I've already started doing. Just yesterday, I had a walk with a few families that are going to be impacted by a potential boundaries change on the Southeast to get a better understanding of what that walk looks like for their children. You know what I'm saying? It's those types of opportunities to really get into connection with people and to be on the ground and to show up. That is the first step in building those coalitions. So that is what's going to be a focus for me going forward, is figuring out, no, not even necessarily figuring out, but continuing to work with communities and to show up in that way, because the first step is engagement, right? If I'm not engaged with a specific organization, I can't just show up with an ask from day one. I've got to figure out how can I get with these communities in a way that is authentic first, because we all need to be involved in order to get this done for our kids. But second, figuring out how can I position them to be successful? How can I give value to their expertise? And how can I bring that to the table in a meaningful way? Right? So I'm thinking about all these different layers. How are we engaging with the legislature, the city council, various community groups? And how are we, like we've talked about so many times before, breaking down those silos of information? Because we're all working, we like to say, toward the same goal. But if we were to bring everybody and put us all in the same room, figuring out how we can pool those resources and that understanding is going to be crucial. It's going to be key. And we're going to need to continue to have opportunities like this and to continue to create those opportunities for us to come together, because that's the only way we're going to get it done. And that's the primary vision of all of this, is to get it done for our kids, because we don't have time to wait. We don't have time to be sitting around thinking about these things from a perspective of like ideology. Like, we need policy now. We need action now. And I am definitely going to be a board director that is ready to get those things done and to build community support around it, because that's what our kids need. You know, that's why I spend so much of my time with my scout troop in my classroom. And now I've taken on this responsibility as well, because I see how those multifaceted issues impact us, right? My work in the classroom informs my experience as a board director, and my experience as a board director informs my teaching practice in my classroom. And having that constant feedback loop has just been a really, really great way for me to build understanding of how does this affect the individual? How do specific policies affect students in seats? And we need to continue to lean on parents and to engage parents, because, as I mentioned before, they're the experts on their children, and we need them, right? From the perspective of, you know, not being a parent yet, but excited to be one, I'm trying to learn from their perspective, how has their engagement been?
All right, Brandon. So, I mean, it's been a long interview today, actually.
It has indeed.
I thought it was going to be kind of short, but, you know, we covered a lot of stuff.
Hey, that's what happened when you're chopping it up, man.
Yeah, and I want to tell you, man, you're welcome back here anytime.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's an open platform for you, and really invite you to use it as a way to, you know, I know that you said that you want to communicate with the community across all kinds of different platforms. So count Africatown Media as one of the platforms that you can use to communicate to your constituents.
Thank you.
Before we get out of here, what is it that you want to say to, you know, to your constituents in District 7 and the city of Seattle as a whole?
I think the big thing that I want to say is, like, let's get it done. You know what I'm saying? We got a lot of stuff that's going to be coming down the pipeline very soon. We're thinking about ethnic studies. We're thinking about community workforce agreements to make sure that the money that's coming into the community actually stays in the community. How are we providing CTE opportunities? How are we going to figure out this 24 credit situation? Like, how are we going to make ethnic studies a graduation requirement? There are so many pieces that are going to be coming through the school board in the next couple of years, especially. I'm just here. I'm saying I'm not going anywhere. We can get this done if we work together. So let's get it done. Let's work together. Let's figure out how we can make this a better place for Black and brown boys, students of color, and all those students furthest away from educational justice. And I'm here for it.
All right, brother.
Hey, I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, let's get it done.
Let's get it done.
All right.